Most war stories eventually tell you who the enemy is. Suikoden 2 isn't quite that simple, because sometimes the person standing on the other side isn't evil. Sometimes you still care about them, sometimes they're someone you grew up with, someone you fought beside, someone you once trusted with your life. Ryu and Joey began this story as best friends, but the world was about to pull them in two very different directions. And eventually, they would find themselves standing on opposite sides of the same war. Not because they hated each other, but because they both believed they were right. So what happens when neither of you is willing to turn back? What happens when your best friend becomes your sworn enemy? If you're new here, these videos are a little different from traditional retrospectives. We'll talk about the story, of course, the characters, music, gameplay, and everything else that made all of my favorite and your favorite games special. But I'm interested in something that's a little bit harder to explain. What did it actually feel like to play them? Why do certain games disappear from our minds almost as soon as the credits roll, while others stick with us for decades? That's what I want to explore. So if you enjoy indulging in your video game nostalgia, consider subscribing and leaving a like for more videos like this, because you're kind of like me. Because more than 20 years later, there are moments from Suikoden 2 that I can still see perfectly. And strangely enough, some of the most important ones are incredibly small. Before Suikoden becomes this enormous story about war, it's surprisingly intimate. Ryu and Joey aren't legendary warriors. They're basically kids, members of the Unicorn Youth Brigade, and when their camp is attacked, everything they knew disappears almost overnight. They're betrayed, hunted, separated from life as they understood it. And eventually Ryu finds himself with Nanami, his adopted sister. If Ryu and Joey form the heart of Suikoden 2, Nanami is the person desperately trying to hold that heart together. Because these aren't three characters who happen to know one another. They grew up together, they tease each other, they annoy each other, and they worry about each other. There's a history there that the game doesn't need to constantly explain. You can always feel it. And actually, just look at them here. Forget everything that's coming for a second. Forget the war, forget Highland, forget the city-state, forget everything you knew about where Joey eventually ends up. Right now, they're just three kids. Keep this image in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to it. And that's one of those things that Suikoden 2 does so well. It starts very small, then keeps pulling the camera backward. Ryu and Joey's struggle becomes part of something much larger. Highland and the city-state are heading toward war. Entire towns are caught between them. Political alliances fracture and shift. People who had absolutely nothing to do with the conflict suddenly have to survive it. And this is where Suikoden 2 starts showing you what kind of war story it's interested in telling. Not just who wins. What happens to everyone caught underneath it. Todo is one of the earliest examples, and it's where we meet Pilika. Pilika is just a little girl. She's energetic, sweet. She becomes attached to Joey almost immediately. And Joey responds to her in a way that tells us a lot about his character. This isn't some power-hungry villain waiting for an opportunity to reveal himself. He's kind, protective. He cares about this kid, which makes what happens to Todo hurt that much more. Because Luca Blight and Highland simply don't conquer it. They destroy it, and Pilika loses essentially everything. Her home, her family, the safety a child assumes is just going to be there tomorrow. And suddenly this enormous war has a face, and it's hers. This is something Suikoden 2 keeps doing again and again. It takes something huge and makes it personal. And Joey sees it too. That's important. Because the same suffering that eventually convinces Ryo that he has to fight is also changing Joey, just differently. And then there's Luca Blight. Look, there are complicated villains, there are sympathetic villains, there are villains whose motivations make you sit back and wonder whether maybe they kind of have a point. Luca doesn't need you to understand him. He wants domination, he wants suffering, and the game establishes that very quickly. There's an ugliness to him that makes every scene he's in feel dangerous, like you're just on the edge of a cliff. And that's important because Suikoden 2 eventually becomes something much more morally complicated. Ryu and Joey become complicated, the war itself becomes complicated, and decisions people make become complicated. Luca? Luca gives you something refreshingly simple. This guy has to die. And yet removing him doesn't magically fix the world. That's where the story gets interesting. Because Luca Blight isn't the entire problem. He's what happens when a broken political system gives a monster enough power to act without restraint. And once he's gone, the war keeps going. The game keeps going. And this is where I think Joey becomes one of the most interesting characters in the game and one of my favorite characters in any JRPG. Because it would have been really easy to make him the fallen best friend. You've seen this story before. Good guy gets tempted by power, good guy changes, and then he becomes evil. Now go beat him. But that's not really Joey. Joey looks around at the world and reaches a conclusion. The way things are isn't working. The city-state is fractured, its leaders bicker and fight. Personal ambition gets in the way. People die while those in power maneuver around one another, and Joey begins to believe that the only way to actually end this cycle is to take control of it. One ruler, one nation, one source of authority powerful enough to stop the fighting forcefully. And here's the uncomfortable part. You can understand how he got there. That doesn't mean you have to agree with him. I don't, but I understand him. Because Joey isn't trying to destroy the world Ryu wants to save. They're actually trying to save the same world. They just fundamentally disagree about what saving actually looks like. Ryu gathers people. Joey consolidates power. Ryu builds something from below. Joey tries to control something from above. And slowly, two boys who once fought shoulder to shoulder find themselves walking in opposite directions. Neither of them really stops caring about the other, and that's kind of what makes it hurt. And stuck between them is Nanami. I think it's easy to reduce Nanami to the energetic sister character because she's funny and expressive and cute and sometimes a little overbearing. But emotionally, she occupies a brutal position in this story. She doesn't care about grand political ideology. She doesn't want a kingdom. She definitely doesn't want to build an army. She doesn't want history to remember any of them. She wants her family back. That's it. Ryu, Joey, Nanami, home. And as the story gets bigger, her desire becomes almost painfully small. She watches two people she loves become symbols of opposing sides in a war neither of them ever asked to inherit. And she keeps reaching for something that becomes increasingly impossible. Why can't we just leave? There's something almost childish about that wish. And I don't mean childish even in a bad way. It's the simple answer the rest of us secretly want too. Forget Highland and forget the city-state, forget the runes and the armies and the politics. Just go home. Except there isn't really a home to go back to anymore. And even if you could, have the people around you changed too much? And this is where the music does so much work. Suikoden 2 doesn't have to tell you every time something is sad. The soundtrack understands when to step forward and when to just sit quietly behind a scene. There are themes that, I hear now and I'm immediately transported back. Not necessarily to a boss fight, not to a particular mechanic. Sometimes it's just a place, a conversation, walking through town, that feeling of being somewhere familiar. And that's one of those things that old RPGs are incredibly good at. You'd spend hours in these places, hear the same themes again and again. Eventually, the music stopped feeling like something playing in the background. It became part of your memory of being there. And I could keep describing that, but just listen to this for a second. And if you've played the game, just close your eyes and you'll be transported. And if you haven't, it's just beautiful to listen to. One of Suikoden's defining ideas is the 108 Stars of Destiny, and these are characters scattered throughout the world who can be recruited to your cause. Some are warriors, some are useful, some are weird, some are cooks, all different walks of life. Some require you to jump through increasingly ridiculous hoops before they'll agree to come with you. But recruiting them isn't just about watching a number climb toward 108. Your base, your headquarters changes. At first, it's this enormous empty space that almost feels too big for you. Then people start arriving. A shop opens. Someone offers a service. New rooms become useful. Characters appear in places that used to be empty. There's more conversations, there's more activity, more life. And every time you come home from recruiting people, the place feels a little less like a fortress and a little more like your home. This is one of those things Suikoden 2 doesn't need to put a giant notification on the screen to explain. You built this. Not the walls, the community. And I love the contradiction at the center of it. Like, while the story is about war and tearing people apart, one of the main things you're doing as a player is bringing people together. And the game constantly changes scale alongside the story. So one moment you're in a traditional 6-person turn-based battle with your party. Then you're fighting a 1v1 duel. Then you're suddenly commanding units across a battlefield. And none of these systems need to be impossibly complicated because they're not. They're there to sell the fantasy. And combined, they do sell that fantasy. Ryu isn't just some kid wandering around with 5 people anymore. He's becoming a leader. The battles get bigger because his responsibilities get bigger. And yet the game never completely loses sight of the kid underneath it all. That's crucial, because eventually Ryu isn't merely fighting Highland, he's fighting an army with Joey standing on the other side. And this is where I want to go back to something. Remember earlier, these 3? The kids we looked at before any of this happened? Now look at them. That's what gives this conflict and this story and this game its weight. If you'd shown me only this scene, it's 2 leaders standing on opposite sides of a war. But we know better. We know where they came from. We know what they survived together. We know Joey isn't some stranger Ryu met halfway through the game. This is the person who jumped from that cliff with him. The person who fought beside him. The person who shared his childhood. And now history has turned them into enemies. Except I don't think they ever truly became enemies. Rivals? Yeah. Opponents? Well, they didn't really have a choice. But enemies? I don't think so. Because underneath everything, there's still love there. There's still respect. There's still some tiny part of both of them that remembers what life was like before anyone asked them to save a country. And that's what makes their conflict tragic. It isn't, I hate you. It's, I love you. And I still can't let you do this. That's so much harder. And Suikoden 2 keeps making you feel the cost. Victories don't magically undo what happened. Defeating a villain doesn't resurrect the town. Recruiting 108 people doesn't mean you can protect every single one of them. And being the hero certainly doesn't mean everyone you love gets to walk away untouched. Which brings us back to Nanami. Nanami spends so much of this game trying to keep everyone together, even when the world keeps telling her that's impossible. And eventually she pays for it. Her apparent death hits so hard because of what she represents. She isn't the politician or the general. She's the person who keeps reminding Ryu that before he became a leader, he was her brother. And before Joey became whatever history would eventually call him, he was family too. That's the life she's fighting for. Not victory or conquest. Them. And when it seems like that's been taken away, it feels like the final piece of that childhood innocence has been destroyed. The war hasn't just changed the map. It's consumed the 3 kids we started with. Or at least, that's what the game wants you to believe. By the end, Ryu and Joey have become almost perfect reflections of one another. Both carry enormous responsibility, both have people depending on them, and both have made decisions that can never completely be taken back. Both believe that what they're doing is what has to be done, and neither one can simply walk away. That's something I appreciate now more than I probably did when I was a kid. Sometimes conflict isn't created because one person is good or the other is evil. Sometimes 2 people can just love each other, understand each other, even want the same ultimate outcome in a way, and still reach a point where neither can follow the other's path. That's Ryu and Joey. Best friends, sworn enemies. And somehow, both descriptions are true at the same time. Which is why the ending has always stayed with me. It isn't about armies. It isn't about political borders or even really winning the war. It's about going back. Or can you go back? Back to where everything started. Back to the promise. Back to Joey. Because after everything that's happened, after armies and betrayal and death and responsibility, there's still something unfinished between these 2. And once again, Suikoden 2 takes this enormous story and makes it small. 2 friends together again. And if you've done what the game asks of you, if you've gathered the stars, if you've held on to hope when the story gives you every reason not to, Nanami can be there too. And suddenly, there they are. The 3 kids from the beginning, not unchanged, like they could never be unchanged. Too much happened, but together. And remember what I asked you near the beginning? Keep this image in the back of your mind. This is why. Because for all the armies, all the politics, all 108 stars, the betrayals, and all the battles, I think this is what Suikoden 2 was fighting for the entire time. Not restoring the world to exactly what it was, that's impossible, but finding something worth carrying forward after the world changes. Friendship, family, hope. And maybe that's why Suikoden 2 has stayed with people for so long. There are bigger RPGs now, there are more cinematic RPGs, games with enormous worlds and thousands of lines of dialogues and NPCs. But Suikoden 2 understood something that doesn't age. You can make the war enormous. You can put kingdoms at stake, you can give me 108 people to recruit and an army to command. But if you want me to actually care about any of it, make it personal. Give me the 3 kids, let me watch them laugh together, let me watch the world pull them apart. And then make me spend the rest of the game hoping, somehow, I can put them back together.